Coming up next is the Dr. Kim Taylor Show. Here's your chance to talk about what matters to you. Although you'll receive helpful advice from Dr. Kim, remember this is not to be construed as any form of psychotherapy, diagnosis or treatment, and cannot replace a therapeutic relationship with a mental health professional. You can reach Dr. Kim by calling 564-1290 or 866-564-1290. You can also listen live on the internet at drkimtaylorshow.com. Now, here's Dr. Kim.
Today I want to talk about a topic that has been in the news recently, and certainly one that I'm dealing with in my own life. The issue is forgiveness. How do we forgive others who have hurt us, and why is it important that we try? Just recently, I'm sure we've all heard how the family members of those slain in Charleston, South Carolina, reached out immediately, and they forgave the man who killed their loved ones. Listening to them, I was in awe of their ability to give their forgiveness to someone who had committed such a brutal and senseless crime against these innocent people. What the family members did was heroic. It was honorable. And yes, it was inspiring. Could you have done that? Would you be able to find it in your heart to forgive? I'm sure that in the long run, it will help the family members heal. But by giving forgiveness, they have now helped, on a collective level, an entire community begin the healing process. Forgiveness, well, it's an incredible concept. It can be difficult to give. And for anyone dealing with the hurt, the pain, the betrayal, or even the disappointment from another, it can be a long journey to achieve that goal. But what I've learned along the way is it's important to realize that the work we do to reach forgiveness, it's really to release ourselves from the very unhealthy bond that will destroy us if we hold on to our pain. There's a quote from Max Lucado, and it reads, "Forgiveness is unlocking the door to set someone free and realizing you were the prisoner." While the challenge of putting the past hurt behind us and moving on can feel like it's a huge, enormous task, what I truly believe is that we need to learn to forgive. Not because we have to forget or pardon the offense of someone else, but because we have to choose to set ourselves free of the pain and hurt so that it doesn't turn us into someone that we were not meant to be. Today, my guest is psychologist and author, Dr. Juliet Rodhe-Brown, and she's written the book, Imagine Forgiveness. And she's here to talk about forgiveness and how to apply it in our own lives. So do you have someone in your life whom you need to forgive? Or is there something that you have done that you find it really difficult to forgive yourself? I want you to join in today. I want you to give me a call at 805-564-1290 or use my email for your questions at drkim@drkimtaylorshow.com. So I'll be right back with my guest on the other side of this short break. I'm Dr. Kim Taylor, and you're listening to the Dr. Kim Taylor Show right here at KZSB AM 1290.
You are listening to Dr. Kim Taylor on KZSB AM 1290.
My guest is Dr. Juliet Rodhe-Brown, and she is a licensed clinical psychologist. She was a core faculty member as well as the director of practicum training in the doctoral program in clinical psychology at Antioch here in Santa Barbara. And she has written the book, Imagine Forgiveness. It's really about her experience with forgiveness and how all of us can learn to forgive and move forward in our lives. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Kim. Welcome.
So let's just start out with a basic question. What is forgiveness?
First of all, I want to correct something. I'm now at Pacifica Graduate Institute, and I was at Antioch for a number of years. But
okay.
Just to that's my full-time employment right now. So what is forgiveness? That is such a loaded question. Forgiveness conjures up all kinds of images and feelings for people. I was 4 days with a group of people once from all different disciplines in Oxford at a conference, and we came up with the conclusion at the end about the definition of forgiveness. And that was, we have no idea, because it's a very, very difficult topic.
Very complex.
The definition that I like the most is one that has been put forth by Robert Enright and Fitzgibbons, his partner, a while ago, like in the mid-90s. They came out with this, and I'd just like to read it because I wrote it down because it's I think it covers it very well. So this is talking about forgiveness of another. So, quote, people upon rationally determining that they've been unfairly treated forgive when they willfully abandon resentment and related responses to which they have a right, and endeavor to respond to the wrongdoer based on a moral principle of beneficence, which may include compassion, unconditional worth, generosity, and moral love, to which the wrongdoer, by nature of the hurtful act or acts, has no right. So I like that definition of forgiveness because it covers the fact that it should not be something that we condone, and it also expresses that it's an internal act, it's an internal gesture of intention, and that it can even be considered a moral gift. Not moral in the sense of the Ten Commandments or something, or what's right or wrong, but moral based on basic philosophical and spiritual beneficence.
Well, it sounds like they were really talking about that you have to have a compassion for yourself and to find compassion for others, and to really start to shift your perspective about that so that you can find perhaps some meaning in this to help you to move forward with it.
Yes, it starts with compassion. It starts with honing, that ability to have compassion for self and others. And that's not always easy, as we know. That's not always easy.
So why is forgiveness, and to be able to reach forgiveness, to get to that point, why is that so important just to our general well-being?
Forgiveness is important to our well-being because, well, there's so many levels to this, because it's not only on an individual but on a collective level, and even an ecological level, if you will. But it's important, if I go right to the studies that have been done, we're seeing that it's very helpful for heart rate coherency. It's very helpful for decreasing stress, for better sleep, for less anger, for less hyper-arousal states, for a lessening of an overall sadness, less fatigue, less body tension. And the other things that are coming out is that it could have the capacity to actually help our immune system.
So forgiveness really heals the mind, the body, and the spirit.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What happens if we're to hold on to that hurt from the pain that was inflicted? What happens within our body when we try to hold it within us and to not release it?
I think that a very simple exercise that listeners can do is simply, right now, clench your jaw, make fists, tighten your shoulders up, and hold that for a moment. And now take a breath and let it go. That clenching, that's what it does. That's what non-forgiveness can do to our body. And when we clench like that and we have chronic stress like that in our body, we're seeing all kinds of problems with that. We're leaning into a place where we're making ourselves vulnerable to getting sick. And that means physically emotionally not well, not being in a place of wellness, and also in a spiritual place.
You talk within your book that all of this unexpressed hurt, and it gets that anger gets turned inward, and it comes out in self-hatred. It can come out in depression, but also that it can get projected out into our current present day of relationships that have nothing to do with past hurt, but we can play those out also, so that it is really important to understand the damage that holding on to this hurt and not being able to reach this place of forgiveness, it really affects all areas of our self and our life.
It affects our relationships, because if we're holding on to a non-forgiving stance, it's going to affect our worldview in terms of walking out in the world and having that story going on in our being constantly, so that we meet someone new and we've already got that story about our lives, and we're in our relationships with others, and it colors our relationships. Now, people do this to protect themselves, and that's a worthy effort, and thank God that we have self-protective systems. But it can go awry when the particular event then starts to extrapolate to just about every place else in life, so that one could then be said to have a non-forgiving worldview.
And how does that get played out? Because I think that's what's being played out in our world today, that non-forgiving perspective.
Well, I come back to some Buddhist perspectives here, because in Buddhism, the idea is the greatest cause of suffering is a sense of separateness. And that's it. We can put it all in a nutshell right there. The sense of separateness is what makes us think we're better than somebody else. We're purer than somebody else. We've got it more together than somebody else. Or they've got it more together than we do. It's this sense that they're different, so therefore I have nothing to do with them. They're different. They have a different belief system, so therefore I hate them. These are the types of stories that people on this planet go around saying to themselves and their children and their groups. And it's toxic.
And don't you think a part of this separateness is also people feel so misunderstood?
Yes.
That they're fighting, and they keep that energy up to, keep fighting because they just don't feel like the other person gets it yet or understands why they're hurt.
Yes, I think that's exactly it, because every single person, we all want to be loved. We all want to be understood, as you say. And basically those pieces about separateness, if we really, really come down to
the core,
it's fear. It's a fear-based reaction.
I know for a lot of people, and this probably includes myself, because this issue is present in my own life too, so the question keeps coming up is, how do we find this healing power that you're talking about to be able to forgive without forgetting or condoning wrongful actions that have been done against us?
How do we find it? The big question, right? Because it's not only others, it's self-forgiveness too that we talk about with forgiveness. But so first of all is the piece about feeling safe to venture into that process. Discovering for ourselves what forgiveness means. Because somebody else can tell us what forgiveness means, but we have to discover for ourselves, what does that mean to us? What does it mean to forgive? Am I ready to forgive? Am I ready to just try a small piece? And that requires some acceptance. acceptance of exactly where we are right here, right now, and taking responsibility for actions we've done, if it's self-forgiveness, actions that others have done, to not say that they're off the hook or that we're condoning or saying, oh, it's okay, it doesn't matter. And so then the acceptance, asking what it means to us, starting with a small step, paying attention to the images that come up, the dreams, because a stance of non-forgiveness is going to show up in our dreams too. But first of all, starting with our body, that's the place to start. Where are we dissociating from our body? How are we feeling that we're not forgiving in our body? And when we have those moments of tuning into a feeling of flow in our body, what's that like? So how do I know I'm not forgiving? How do I know I'm forgiving? And then really that self-compassion is so important. And sometimes people say, but how do I do that? All that happens when I'm trying to have compassion for myself here is I can't do it. So we might then suggest to that person, can you have a little compassion for the part of yourself that is struggling with compassion? And people usually respond to that. And then there are things people can do that can help them kind of try on what it's like. If they're not in psychotherapy, that would be a good thing if they are. But if they're not, then there are some really sweet guided imagery, guided relaxation, guided meditations. I think Tara Brach and Jack Kornfield have some really nice pieces out there on forgiveness. And Christine Neff, who's also a researcher and a psychologist, has a lot of things out there on self-compassion. So they can start by maybe listening, even on their iPhone, to some things.
Well, I think it's very true that we're really seldom taught how to forgive. And yet, for us to get through our life, we are going to be hurt. We're going to be disappointed. There are going to be all kinds of things that, unless we're able to learn how to do this, we're going to kind of be stuck with those feelings, and not being able to process them is actually going to help to destroy your life. So we are going to come back. We're going to talk about more of those steps. We do need to take a quick break. I'm here with psychologist and author Dr. Juliet Rodhe-Brown, and she has her book called Imagine Forgiveness, and we're going to talk more about this right after the break.
You are listening to Dr. Kim Taylor on KZSB AM 1290.
If you are just joining me, we are talking about forgiveness, and the question for you is, are you holding on to any hurt or anger from a past experience? And if you are, and if you would like to ask a question about that, you can write an email at drkim@drkimtaylorshow.com. I'm here right now with author and psychologist Dr. Juliet Rodhe-Brown, and we are talking about her book, Imagine Forgiveness. So tell us what forgiveness is not.
It's not condoning. It's not letting people off the hook. It's not going back into an abusive relationship. It's not being a martyr.
I think a lot of people think, well, I have a right to be mad, and I have a right to stay mad, and that they stay mad for a very long, long time. How do you work that sense that most people, I think, feel that forgiveness is letting somebody off the hook and saying that what you did to me didn't hurt, or it didn't hurt that bad, and therefore I'm letting you off the hook. But that's not really it. But they do have to be able to understand how to work past that righteous feeling that they are entitled to be hurt and to be mad.
Because the anger and the grief are the first pieces, and to just ride over those is, on rare occasions that can happen. But typically, it's a long process, typically. And the anger and grief, because in a way, I go back to Erik Erikson, the developmental psychologist, who said somewhere, depression is a paradise, nostalgia for a paradise forfeited. And when I say that to clients, they get it right away. But it's also very valid for forgiveness. A paradise has been forfeited. A hope, a dream, a way, a belief system about life, about relationships, about self.
And people.
Has been forfeited, because we all know that our birthright is to have things work out nicely for us, to be attuned to each other, to have that blessed sense of a paradise together. We know that we're capable of that somewhere deep down, that human beings are capable of that. And yet we develop myths around happily ever after, or one should never get hurt in life. And they're myths, because we're human and we're going to be hurt, and we're going to hurt others, each and every one of us. There's not one of us who doesn't have something that could benefit from some forgiveness.
There's something you say in your book. It's a quote that says, "Where there is a wound, there is an opportunity for learning and healing to occur." Tell us about how shifting our perspective, that we can grow and evolve out of a situation in which we have been very hurt.
Where we look at the wound as the actual gift in a certain sense. The late psychologist James Hillman said something about that in terms of betrayal and forgiveness. He said something to the effect of, without the seed of, what did he say? Just as trust had within it the seed of betrayal, so betrayal has within it the seed of forgiveness. So once we can be with someone and have witness to our anger, our grief, it's good to share it with someone. A therapist is a good person, a good friend. We then can start to have a new relationship with that wound, a new relationship with the event or events or ongoing event. We can shift our way of being with it. We can remove ourselves from a dangerous situation, a situation where we can tell that it will be repeated and repeated. And we can then also forgive those who are worthy of forgiveness, and even those who are not deserving of forgiveness in the classic sense of things. If that makes sense.
Well, I think it does, because I think it's important that it is easier to forgive someone who is sorry, number one, who seeks retribution, who is trying to do better, who recognizes it, and who understands the impact that it had on you. That's a lot easier to get to than someone who refuses to acknowledge that they hurt you or is dismissive of it in some way. But nonetheless, what we're talking about here is it's still important to come to forgiveness, again, not for them, but for yourself.
Yes, exactly. And as we do that for ourselves, we show up in the world in a different way, and we're then giving back to the world in a very tangible way. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm lecturing or pontificating about forgiveness. It's a very private, it's a very unique to each individual, and there are a lot of things that occur in this world that are just horrendous. There's a lot of beauty in this world too, and I know that the way I look at it is it's kind of a spiral model I have of forgiveness, where there's kind of like a lamentation first. And that is to have the story and have it heard, and know that by moving into a place of forgiveness, if that's your choice, that doesn't mean that the story is going to be lost, dismissed, invalidated even worse, condoned, the event. But now it's heard. Now there's been a tangible experience of what it meant and then what it means to move into what then I then call a descent. Descending, dropping down into the feelings, dropping down into the availability of what's new. In Buddhism, they call it beginner's mind, or we might even just call it dropping into that sense of wonder of the next moment, the present moment. Mm-hmm. And then we have room for an emergence. Sometimes in that descending, we can really get in touch with our body. We can use the arts. We can explore our dreams. We can journal a little bit. We can read passages. We can tap into spiritual role models and find out for us how we connect to the sacred. If that's something that we value, even that word, there may be other words people have, just being in nature. Mm-hmm. So then the emergence of opening to what's new now? I can hold that story for the past and put it somewhere where it doesn't dominate my whole existence or my identity or the identity of others. Mm-hmm. That I can let go of that once I accept it, because acceptance is the first piece. Mm-hmm. So then the emergence can happen, and a certain transcendence can happen, a transformational experience where what we're truly doing then is moving to another level of developmental complexity, and we're having an expansion of perception, an expansion of consciousness. In fact, I'm going to go back to another neurological study that was done in Italy on forgiveness and the capacity to imagine. When I wrote my book, Imagine Forgiveness, that was based on my own belief system and the work I've done through the years with imagery and, dreams and honoring the imaginary, honoring the body, honoring that we can get there by opening our awareness and expanding our vision and our perception. But just recently, in the last couple of years, a study came out from Italy where they actually, because of all the technology these days where you can look at what's lighting up in the brain and everything with fMRI and other things, that those who could imagine, who could show the capacity for imagination and for metaphor, symbols, they were able to forgive more easily, because if you can imagine and you can expand your perception, you can also move out of your own narrow, self-referenced experience and put on the shoes of another and imagine what it might be like to be them, imagine what it might be like to forgive. And so it literally expands our perception to be able to imagine.
In your book, you state that there is an entry into forgiveness. What do you mean by this?
I think the entry is, first of all, if someone wants to. That's one thing in psychotherapy. We don't want to push people to this. And if people say they wish to forgive, we can address it in a very explicit way. I find that often the entry is through working with oneself in psychotherapy or some other way, but sometimes it's subtle and the word forgiveness doesn't even come up. Mm-hmm. However, forgiveness is often an outcome, a very wonderful outcome that comes from meditative practices that are compassion-based, from good psychotherapy where there's a lot of attunement and a very relational way of working, and through the love of friendships and things like that, and people showing a different way, people modeling a different way.
Mm-hmm. I find also that a lot of times people don't know that is the issue at hand, that they can become very closed off to something, or something happens in their life and they keep kind of hitting the same roadblock. And they have to be able to go back to realize that because they had not been able to do this kind of work, that they closed part of themselves off to protect themselves. But that in order to move forward, they do have to go back and to really do that work so that they can then move forward in their life.
Yes, it's typically a pretty, long process. However, there are those moments of grace where people just move there. They move to that place.
Well, let's talk about a moment of grace, because that certainly did just happen. We all saw that in the news, where the people who were the family members of the people slain in Charleston, who they were really able to come out right afterwards and look at the attacker who had just murdered their family members and say, I forgive you. Is that possible?
It's not for us to say.
Yeah.
It's not for anyone to say, but the people who experienced it. And
It was profound,
Yes.
because I was so moved by that.
yes, me
To
too.
be able to, and I think that the only thing that really does explain it is perhaps grace,
If we think about what they were doing, they were praying together.
I know.
They were praying together, and they were a group that gathered together for that very purpose. So one could imagine that perhaps these are people who are already coming from a forgiveness worldview. They're already in that place. They had personal connection with this person. They invited him into their circle. And now there's another side to this that's out in the media and people are talking about. And I want to be respectful, too, because there is a lot of racism in our world, unfortunately. And some have suggested that the forgiveness came too soon and that the individuals and families who expressed it were functioning under another sort of manifestation of racism, of internalizing I'm trying to remember exactly how it was positioned, but an internalization of a way of exploring or being with Christianity that, that's how he said it, was Cornel West, taming the black person or something like that. Now, I prefer to look at it from the point of view that who are we to say? And at the same time, I felt guilty when I heard that for not considering the larger, the nuances of that experience. Regardless, I would still say that even if the full forgiveness wasn't all there at that time, they were engaging in the practice of forgiveness, regardless of all of these other socio-political questions, which I don't know, and I think it's important to have those conversations. But I also found it a little bit disrespectful of the families to be trying to judge whether they were experiencing real forgiveness or not. It's not for any of us to decide.
Exactly.
So, and grace happens. Grace does happen. And perhaps they were showing that we can respond to violence in a different way, regardless of all these other considerations, which are huge considerations, and that we can practice forgiveness. We can be in the practice of it.
That part I would like to talk about more, about being in the practice of forgiveness.
Okay.
I'm here with Dr. Julia Rodhe-Brown. She has written the book, Imagine Forgiveness. We need to take a quick break. I'll be right back after this. I'm Dr. Kim Taylor, and you're listening to The Dr. Kim Taylor Show.
You are listening to Dr. Kim Taylor on KZSB AM 1290.
My guest for the hour is Dr. Juliet Rodhe-Brown. She's a psychologist and author of Imagine Forgiveness. So in talking about what is the practice of forgiveness, where might one start if one recognizes that one has the intention to forgive but is having a hard time getting started into this process?
I think one can start by, first of all, defining for themselves what it means to forgive and being sure that they aren't saying that they're condoning. And then finding a way that they can create a relationship with a therapist, perhaps, or a sacred space in their home, to have some quiet time to explore how they're going to work on accepting. In Hawaii, there's a Hawaiian practice called Ho'oponopono, and in that, it's suggested that people say, "I'm sorry, I love you, please forgive me, I thank you," and it goes both ways, to the forgiver and the one being forgived, regardless of the person is there or not. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, that might have to do with reconciliation. So you asked me the steps, and the one thing I don't want to do is suggest that there's any kind of cookie cutter.
Right.
This is the step to forgiveness, and aren't you great? Because now you have got it.
The formula for success. Yeah.
Formula. Pat yourself on the back.
Right.
Yeah.
It isn't going to work that way, but there are things that people can start to think about in terms of being able to see how it will work for them.
Absolutely. And sometimes reading books about forgiveness is helpful. Going to retreats, if people can't afford to do that kind of thing, then they can find how they can connect to what makes them feel safe, what makes them feel a sense of easeful breath in their body, so that they can start exploring forgiveness from that place of getting their body in a place where they're not going to be hyper aroused over something, they're not going to be activated. And then they don't have to leap all the way into forgiveness. Mm-hmm. A small step, let's say someone has gone through a divorce and it's been with a lot of fighting going on and things like that, and they have children, and let's say that person is going, to pick up the kids this week, and all they do is badmouth the ex-spouse. Mm-hmm. Well, one step would be, don't do that when in front of the kids. Mm-hmm. That is one step somebody can do to move toward forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And then once they do that, they're going to feel better ultimately. The kids are definitely going to feel better. It's a gift to them to not be doing that. And they'll feel it, and it might inspire a person to move to the next step.
I think also sometimes just blessing that person, but just to bless them and wish them well, at least somehow starts to see that if you have the capacity to do that and you see yourself as a person who can give in that way, it starts to get rid of all of the anger that you're holding on inside if you're just starting to switch that. There is also the part of needing to forgive ourselves, because often we have to consider that we played a part in being hurt. So how important is it to look at yourself and to work to forgive yourself? I think what I want to ask is, do you have to forgive yourself first before you can forgive someone else?
Typically that's suggested, yes. Some people, if they're separating them out, say it's a lot easier to forgive others first. But I truly think we have to be coming from a self-compassionate place first, which when I say compassion, I also include forgiveness with that. But we have to also look at when it's self-forgiveness, is this something that we truly need to forgive ourselves about? I mean, if we're raped, are we going to say it was our fault and therefore we need to forgive ourselves for putting ourselves in that situation? No. But we can forgive ourselves for how we've treated ourselves since, how we've internalized certain things, how we've treated ourselves negatively, as if we're soiled or something. You know,
or if some part of you does blame yourself. Yes.
If some part of ourselves does blame ourselves. So, but we have to explore this idea of having, and the feeling of having the compassion for ourselves first, the acceptance.
Okay.
And also the responsibility, taking responsibility for what we did. If we truly did something to hurt another and to hurt ourselves, take responsibility for it.
So what would you say, just in closing? We have about a minute left.
There's a Rumi quote, and
Okay.
I think it exemplifies forgiveness. And it goes like this: there's a way of breathing that's a shame and a suffocation, and another way of expiring, a love breath that lets you open infinitely.
Dr. Juliet Rodhe-Brown, thank you very much for being here. And I would recommend your book and everybody to go out at whatever bookstore or book place that you buy books these days. Get her book, Imagine Forgiveness. I will be right back at the end of this break for some closing comments. I'm Dr. Kim Taylor, and you're listening to The Dr. Kim Taylor Show.
You are listening to Dr. Kim Taylor on KZSB AM 1290.
Where in your life do you need to extend forgiveness? Can you see how holding on to it is only hurting you now? The truth is that we have the option to change the past. And in order to do that, we must move forward. And we can make our world a better place today by learning to forgive, to practice the art of forgiveness. So I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope that you've enjoyed the program. If you're interested in more information on Dr. Juliet Rodhe-Brown and her book, Imagine Forgiveness, you can contact her by going to my website at drkimtaylorshow.com. You can also reach her at www.drjrb.com. And for now, you can also listen to the rebroadcasts of this show Thursday evenings at 10 p.m. and Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. right here at KZSB AM 1290. Also, if you'd like to hear a past show, you can go to iTunes and or YouTube channel now, but you can also just get these links by going to my website at drkimtaylorshow.com. And of course, I'd love to hear from you. So again, send your questions and or comments to me at drkim at drkimtaylorshow.com. I want to thank my engineer, Mark Giles, for helping me today. And of course, the behind the scenes, Richard Dugan. So be well until next week. And I'll be right back here live at 5 as I am every Thursday afternoon now, right after the news at 5:06. I'm Dr. Kim Taylor. Until then, remember, nobody else has to change in order for you to feel better. And this includes forgiveness. So take good care, and I'll be here next time. I hope you will be too.